Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Citrix session, episode number 132. I'm your host, Bill Sutton. Mr. Whiteside is not with us today. He's off doing other things, so we'll welcome him back on the next episode, hopefully. I have with me, as usual, a couple of folks from the Cloud Software Group, also known as Citrix. Todd, you want to say hello? Todd Smith?
Hey, guys. Thanks for taking the time and joining us today. Been somewhat a somber day here in Boston with the Bruins losing last night in overtime. So that'll be a tough thing. But hey, you know what? We're on to baseball season.
That's right. Not going to do it so great there, but never know. They did pretty well in the last series, so we'll see. Yeah.
Exactly.
Also with us, Geremy Meyers from the Cloud Software Group. Jeremy, you want to say hello?
You know what? Happy Monday, gang. It was a quick weekend. We had a lot of fun. Took the kiddos Cub Scout camping.
Oh, and, cool.
That was super, super entertaining. A lot like taking kittens camping, just from an attention span perspective. But we had a good time. Only got rained on twice. So,
well, that's part of the experience.
That is
a couple of scouters on this call with you, myself, as well as Mr. Coble. Patrick Coble's with us today, too, from VDI-Sec. Patrick, you want to say hello? You're on mute, Patrick, if you're there. All right, we'll let him join back in when he gets a chance, so no worries. All right, so today we're going to go through this blog by Praveen. I'll just leave it at that. It's called Citrix Secure Private Access on Premises, Announcing General Availability. So this article covers, obviously, the secure private access, which has been available via Citrix Cloud for a little while now, over a year. And this is making its way to the on-premises environment to provide zero trust network access for customers who aren't able to leverage the service in the cloud, particularly those with closed networks or regulated environments, et cetera. Government environments may need to leverage on-premises resources. So I'll just hand it over to the folks from Citrix. Todd or Jeremy, jump in, give general comments on this, and then we'll go through the article.
Yeah, let Jeremy jump in first.
Okay. Well, thank you for that, Todd. So SPA, Secure Private Access, I guess, as a solution, has been something that has been available as a cloud service for, well, actually, it wasn't always called SPA. I think we had a couple of names for it.
Yeah, it was called something else, wasn't it?
It was called something else, yeah. But maybe 2 years at the most.
Okay.
It was a part of our workspace service. Initially, we were just doing single sign-on into web apps. But now this is sort of a VPN replace. I think one of the key use cases is around, and this is regardless of how you have this deployed on-prem or even as the service, is let's just say you've got internal websites and you want to provide access to them. Historically, a Citrix administrator would publish a web browser, and I'm publishing Chrome, or depending on how long you've been doing this, it was IE, with Java attached. But ultimately, the idea was I want to provide internal access. I'm going to do it with a Citrix session. The idea being, I want to protect the web access. I didn't necessarily want to use a VPN for it, straight proxy. And I mean, listen, it was a great solution because I could manage data leakage. So all the policies around copy and paste and restricting printing and who could have access and who didn't. The idea was let's transition from publishing a browser to doing that natively on the endpoint using a managed browser, but again, still providing all those same controls. So, there is a browser baked into Workspace app, if you weren't aware, called the Enterprise Browser, and you can wrap those same controls around it. But in this case, you're offloading, all of the processing and access to the endpoint, but you're still sort of containerizing that access. So it proxies through the gateway service if you're an SPA service customer, or through a NetScaler if you're on-prem SPA, which we just introduced here. So it's a pretty slick solution.
Yeah, and Jeremy, to add on to your point, I think most Citrix admins, I certainly had experience with this, was we would have to publish browsers because we would inject configuration settings into that published browser session without having, because browsers didn't have things like profile management and being able to kind of inject the user personality into a browser session, right? So you have to build it into the published browser application that you would publish. So it was kind of an interesting and very complex way to solve a very basic, simple problem. So great to see that we've included this enterprise browser into this, and it kind of fits into our whole zero trust network access philosophy that we've introduced. And the whole theme around the user migrates between different environments, and there's different settings that need to be applied based on where the user is, what device they're on, kind of that whole session management type of solution has now worked its way into the web and SaaS-based application delivery.
Yeah, absolutely. Patrick, you have any comments here before we move forward? You're muted, man.
Yeah. Overall, it's a really exciting space. I just wrote a blog about it, or article, or whatever you call it these days, whatever the kids are calling it, just last week about VDI versus this. And then a couple weeks before that, then I wrote one that compared Citrix against Google against Talon. And then I'll have an update in a little bit on Seraphic and Island and a couple others that are in this space, because it's a very interesting space. It's way cooler than I thought it was when I first started looking at it, and I'm excited to see where it goes. And Citrix has a really, really good solution, and it's big and powerful and strong. And I think anybody that has a percentage of web applications that run their day-to-day business is something they seriously need to look at. If you already own Citrix and that's the easy button, this is just like click in Citrix Cloud, next, I want to do this. So that there's no excuse to not do it. And then some of the remote browser isolation and stuff like that's really cool. The policy engine's getting better. It's pretty good right now. But there's the only thing that's the biggest takeaway for me in this whole space of this enterprise browser and SPA on the Citrix side is that Citrix is the only one that has all their stuff out on the internet and is publicly available. Google kind of has their stuff with BeyondCorp, but it's all obfuscated and it's thousands of pages of nonsense. It's not a clear and concise message. And then every other vendor is just word salad on the internet. They don't have a screenshot of the product. There's no demos. There's no guides. There's no blogs. No one has a screenshot of the thing. It's just this magical browser that people are paying X dollars a month per user, and you don't know. And so in my book, Citrix wins in that respect for sure, of at least having blogs, guides, screenshots, tech zone articles, everything you need. And there's the social media has taken off on its own of people documenting it and telling their experience, whereas all these other places you have to have an NDA just to see the demo, and you can't share the screenshot of the demo, so they're all top secret squirrel. But yeah, I mean it's cool. I'm looking forward to seeing some of the stuff keep coming from Citrix and some of the other vendors in this space.
I think what's interesting is, a lot of the products that we've introduced over the past few years, it's really hard to experience something new as an end user, right? So listen, new version of PBS comes out. That's awesome. I don't really know what that feels like as an end user, right? I'm like, all right, I got a desktop, right? I made an admin happy, but on the flip side, it's hard to see. WEM, we've got a lot going on with WEM right now as a service, which is really an interesting conversation in itself. But at the end of the day, I'm just trying to get to my apps. So as an end user, I don't really see WEM either. It's funny, like I use just a little bit of insight into what we do at Citrix is, I've got workspace app, I've got published desktops, I got published apps. But I'll be honest, most of what I access are websites, and 3/4 of those are internal websites. And so I'll fire up my desktop literally just to have website access. But I got to be honest, to fire up a desktop, let's just say I got to log in, I got to get my profile, all these things just to go launch a website. Listen, if that's my only option, fine. But once I had access to enterprise browser and I'm launching some of these internal tools that I need, that I use daily from this browser that sits right next to all the other things I'm running locally, oh my gosh, it's a game changer. It really is exciting to feel this for the first time all over again as an end user.
What I think, I mean, browser in general is a foundational app to the world now, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's a everyday thing. How many tabs does everybody have open right now? I'm probably in the 100+ club on 4 browsers right now, right? Like, and that's just my day to day, just doing normal things. And that's not, I'm not even that crazy other than the 4 browsers probably, but everybody's in the 20 to 40 plus tabs when they've done a bunch of research from Google and released that. So it's a big deal. And it's also the most common attack avenue. This is where things get clicked on. This is where bad things can happen, is where good things can happen too. But when it's your predominant application, it's a big deal for sure. And I'm glad this is happening.
Yeah. And if I put an administrator hat back on, or if I put a CTO hat, someone who's paying the bills, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm looking at, if I have to spend enormous amount of resources and a price for those resources, if I can do it based on a browser, as opposed to having to spin up a virtual desktop, which consumes a lot of resources on the back end, or publish out an application, in this case being a browser, those all take up considerable amount of money in the form of resources, as well as the management level that has to be done. Every single time there's a browser that gets updated, or every single time there's a plugin that needs to be added in a published browser world, I would have to go through the administrative tasks of providing that updates, going through the testing, publishing it out, and then notifying the users that, hey, there's now a new version of this published app out there. It's going to make it a lot simpler. It's going to make it a lot more secure, because we're taking that security model from what we used to get out of a published application or a published desktop or a virtual desktop, and now pushing it directly into the browser and still maintain that level of control.
I mean, here's a good example.
I mean,
one of the beefiest websites that a lot of customers go to is Salesforce.
Yes.
And there's a new experience in Salesforce that is Salesforce Lightning, which is built like every computer's got a Ford Mustang engine underneath it, right? It's just a kind of a heavy website. And so we've had plenty of customers. Bill has shared the stories with me of customers who are publishing Salesforce through a XenApp session, and it's just a dog. So what they've had to do is split that off into VDI. I mean, there's some real cost associated with managing, just the resources to publish some of these browsers. And so, I mean, listen, my local Mac here, I've got app, M1 Silicon, right? I mean, it's a fast processor, and why not offload a lot of this stuff to the endpoint, and you just freed up resources on the back end, which is a really big deal if you're publishing from a cloud and you're paying on the fly for a lot of these cloud resources. I mean, it's a very big deal.
Well, I think another element to it is, and you touched on this a little bit earlier, Geremy, is I think of it, I look at it a lot from the standpoint of the end user experience. And like you said, you can aggregate all of these apps, whether they're web or SaaS or what have you, or installed through the Workspace app by publishing them all on XenApp or Citrix virtual apps and desktops. But the way the world works today, all these SaaS-based apps, like you just said, they run a lot better in a native browser rather than through a hosted session. And being able to aggregate not just the web and SaaS apps in the same environment that is the Workspace app, as you do your published desktops and your published apps that you may still need to run because they're old. There's some of the old legacy 32-bit client server type apps that are still around that still need to be published from a Windows server, versus those that have already transitioned, like Salesforce, like Workday, like Financial Force, like other web-based applications. We use a product here that we use for project management called MavenLink that is all, a lot of these things are web-based, and being able to aggregate that into one place so the user doesn't have to make sure they have the right shortcut in Chrome on their local machine. All they need to do is open Workspace app, click it, and then the beauty of that is they get the app running locally in the enterprise browser, and then the admins on the back end have created controls and security parameters to prevent them from doing the things that they traditionally couldn't do in a published app, like copy and paste, like save to their local drives, all of those things. So when I look at it from the standpoint of the end user experience, they just go one place and they can get to all their apps. It doesn't matter whether they're published, whether they're local, what have you, and secured through the enterprise browsers.
Yeah, I mean, as a security nerd, my favorite thing is that there are controls in SPA that you would pay $10 to $50 a user or more per year to have the ability to do what you can do. And so those things are out of the box as an admin. So when I do a lot of pen tests and audits, if I am allowed to send phishing emails or something like that, it's like in the bag, right? Like we're getting in. And then with this, if I start making some shady websites, which I do on a regular basis, then I can use reputation scoring and device posture on top of that as a part of an add-on for SPA. And someone can't go to my phishing website, right? And so you're able to have content control and visibility reporting and security triggers that are impossible in a couple cases from any vendor, even if you had them all, or you'd be spending a whole lot of money per user, per month, per year to have all those features, and they would not be congruent. They would not be together. You would configure this thing, this endpoint protection client, then you would configure your content control, then you configure your proxy, then you configure your firewall, then you configure this, then you configure your identity management, your conditional access. So you would configure all these things in 4 to 6 places versus 1, right? So that's a big deal.
So I think what you just, maybe you didn't describe this, but if you scroll up a little, Bill, I mean, there is a zero trust network access component to this. Now, that this word gets used a lot. This phrase gets used a lot, right? So it can mean anything, but in the context here, like what are we solving from a zero trust perspective, Patrick, that, like you said, all these other tools would be doing layered on, as a result. But, how are we doing that with SPA in particular?
Yeah. So, I mean, it's based on your device policy posture. And, I think Bill has it highlighted, never trust, always verify, right? Is probably the important part because, ZTNA is pretty much the cloud cuss word of the IT industry, right? Like everyone has to say it like at least 4 or 5 times. If it's a drinking game, you'd be in big trouble. But in the real world, it basically means we don't trust anything until they've proven something, right? And so we're checking that device posture, which is a service from Citrix, and we're making sure that it's patched, it's up to date, it has our certificate, it has our watermark, it has endpoint protection, it has this specific, KBB installed. We're checking these 5, 10, 15 things before it's allowed to come in, even with a good authentication request. And so that zero trust is a big part of that, of making sure that you have to pass these gauntlets to get access. And so ZTNA here means that you don't have to have Zscaler, right? You don't have to buy that product that has kind of built its brand around zero trust, when that's really just the networking part of the problem. This is the networking and the browser and the user part of the problem all glued together, right? So that if someone is browsing around on the Citrix Enterprise browser and they're going to websites that you control, it has the watermark. They can't copy paste. They can't print. They can't do this. They're on, blah, blah website.com. Blah, blah works just fine. They can do all the things that they've always been able to do as a user. And then that way, it's also, I think it's a really good thing that we've got into this browser world. It's just IT, because before it was always my thing, their thing, personal, business, company. Right. Now I'm giving you a browser that you can do all the things in it, right? You can keep doing all your other things over here. But when you're doing our work, we have control over it. Whereas before, this is kind of a blind side of IT overall, is that people didn't have as good a control on web applications like this. And you'd have to publish a virtual desktop or an application or something like that, and, incur that monthly cost per user per month to deliver that. And it works, especially when Java applications were taken over. I mean, I probably deployed 500,000 or 600,000 Citrix users over the course of a couple of years because of Java web applications. We published a browser, and it's because it had to be paired like fine wine with cheese, right? Otherwise it'd make your tummy upset, right? So you had to be just right. This Java version, this extension, this browser version, and then the application works. Any deviation, explosions, fire, and doom, right?
Yeah, it was pretty bad. Well, so one of the things that you just hit on, Patrick, so doing this network wise, right? I think the challenge is how did folks do this in the past? I mean, there's a lot of customers that aren't Citrix customers, right? So they have done this with a VPN, and I think there is some inherent risk in doing it with a VPN. That has nothing to do with what you're providing, but just the way that access looks. Yeah.
The biggest thing for VPN, the most common, misconfiguration and auditable finding is that when you connect to the VPN, you connect to every network and all networks all at once, right? Mm-hmm. It's everything anywhere all at once, right? So that's the big problem with VPNs in general, is that you get too much network access inherently and by default. And that's because microsegmentation really wasn't a thing back when VPNs were a thing. And many VPNs have literally been set up for 10 to 30 years without a major reconfiguration. So if you've been rocking Palo, Checkpoint, or Cisco, or even Fortinet, you may have a VPN gateway that has been configured that way for over a decade. And so the best practices that you might get if you installed it now aren't there. And so we talk about internal applications and external applications. I think that's the biggest difference, right? Is internal, we've been VPNing to get access to that website, or we've been VDIing to give access to that. And then external websites, we've just been like, go to the website, good luck, right? And for better or for worse, that's where we've gotten ourselves into.
So one of the things about the VPN, now we've talked specifically about SaaS apps here, but of course, that's not the only thing that customers are leveraging a VPN for. So for instance, and this is probably more of an administrator thing than anything, but you've got admins who need to RDP internally. I think from a client server perspective, there's not too many applications that work really well when you've got the client in the data center. I mean, the server piece, the back end in the data center, and the client on the endpoint. Now, we've used VPNs from that perspective before, but I think to your point, Patrick, the default posture on a lot of VPNs is allow by default, and then you've got to go restrict. So you've got to go put an access control list or, an ACL on your VPN to say, block these types of things. Oh, by the way, you don't want folks to RDP. We're going to block, 3389. Oh, you don't want folks to SSH or do any of these things. We're going to block these ports. Yep. Whereas I think what we're doing here is it is deny by default.
That's correct.
And then go enable the specific port. So if you do have a client server app, you can go enable that, but just so you know, it's off by default and you got to go turn it on. And so if you get into a scenario where Patrick's right, man, we've got folks who have VPN set up for 10 years and have not reviewed that posture. They're letting things through that they don't even realize. And you've got to go find a way or constantly keep up to date. And that's really hard to do.
Yeah. And I've been on a couple incident responses when bad things have happened. And when we get it down that road a little bit, VPN is where it came from, right? You were VPN'd in, and then your network access had a network access to all the things. And one bad click from you is a problem for everybody, right? And so that's just security that's been proliferating as things have been getting smarter and smarter. And right now, there's a really, really cool webhook that just came out this weekend from a security researcher that I've got to test this morning, or I'll probably test this afternoon now on Citrix Enterprise Browser. But it's basically an HTTP page that I can serve, that as I serve it to you, I can screenshot it without JavaScript. So that means I can make my phishing site like we always do, right? And then there's always usually JavaScript, so that when I send you a malicious username and password field and you go blah, 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 pcobalt, and then you're like, your spidey sense goes, that doesn't look right. That color's wrong. There's no takebacks on the internet, right? You type the password, game over, right? Well, now what this is going to be with this loaded is that if you get in the proper network or DNS paths, you can be a man in the middle and you can screenshot every single thing that's going through that web session, whether they come to you directly or indirectly because of where you placed yourself on the network. So that's going to be some cool stuff, which is going to lead to some bad things happening, right? So it's cool for me as a security nerd, bad for everyone else in the world, right?
That's amazing. If we could just harness this innovation for good.
Yeah.
That would be amazing.
So much money.
So we've talked a lot about SPA and ZTNA. I want to pivot a little bit and talk about this specific solution and the topic of the article, which is SPA for sure, but also SPA on premises. So essentially, it's from what I've read here, and we'll talk about this, but what I'm reading here is it's not really that much, if any, different than it is in the cloud. It's just you just have got to have a later version of Storefront and NetScaler. What else, guys? What am I missing? That's what it basically says right here, I think. But what else should the listener know about how to get this going?
Yeah, well, you also got to have the Workspace app.
Yep.
To make sure that works. And really, this is no different from our solutions that we've had in the past, where you have to have a certain amount of resources on-prem. The NetScaler handles the security. The Workspace app handles a lot of the client side pieces of it, and then you can apply the policies wherever you need them, right? And whatever policies are necessary for you to secure your environment and protect your data. This is not a new story for us. This is basically changing the delivery method.
Yep. Yeah, I highlighted it here for those who are looking at the full recording, but one of the things that's mentioned here, it says no upgrades are required in Storefront on-prem and NetScaler, and the solution works with Citrix's existing infrastructure. Yep. So at the bottom of the article, which we'll touch on, there are some minimum requirements, obviously, but there doesn't appear to be anything additional, if that makes sense. In other words, you don't have to add any services or add any agents or anything like that. They've just got to have the Workspace app on the endpoint, and then Storefront and NetScaler, and then obviously configuration.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing to realize is it is actually a part of the last LTSR. So that's a weird one, right? So we're so used to features in LTSR being so far behind. So that long-term service release is not known to be up to date, so to speak. However, if you get LTSSR, can't even say it, 2203.
Yep. 2203.
That is the minimum. Or if you're non-LTSR, it's 2212.
Yep.
But it'll work with Gateway 12.1.
Yep.
More recent versions of the Workspace app are required.
Yep, it's at the bottom of the blog article what you just said, Geremy. Yeah, the Workspace app 2303 and above for Windows, 2304 or above for Mac, and then the other items that you mentioned about Storefront, NetScaler Gateway, and so forth. And then I want to talk a little bit about this. If you guys, I'm not really sure I know what this is. This global app config service. This is an optional item here. I think what it is in a nutshell is remote management, if you will, or global management of the Workspace app settings. But do you guys know, and can you talk a little bit more about that?
Sure, Todd, go for it. See what I did there?
I knew that was going to come back, Geremy. So the global app config service is something we released probably a couple months ago. And basically it's just like we talked about. It's a configuration service that you can use for the enterprise browser to provide updates, right? So before you go out and hit a website, if you're using the enterprise browser, we'll go and check with the global app config service to make sure it's been updated. It's kind of an orchestrator type of model where it won't let you go out and do something that's not too intelligent or stupid before it goes through and makes a series of passes or confirms that it's safe and secure.
Right. Okay.
So
go ahead.
So there are a lot of configuration settings in this service. You can certainly configure enterprise browser, but it configures quite a few things in Workspace apps. So just be aware of that.
Okay.
It's basically, if you're an old school Citrix nerd from probably 2014, 16.
You're not going to say merchandising server, are you?
This is merchandising server Dazzle 6.7, I think is what this is, right?
Jazz hands.
Right.
Yeah, jazz hands. So, but yeah, it's what we've kind of always wanted, because if we think about all the way back to the Access Gateway days, our Citrix client back then was just smart enough to make the connection and make it kind of good. And have some controls if you bought the AAC version, Advanced Access Control version, and you configured this little appliance and did all this. So now we can control more than just saying in a Citrix storefront or NetScaler Gateway session as it is instantiated. We don't just say like, hey, you got a Citrix client, cool. we're like, hey, do you got a Citrix client and do you have all these settings? Here's our best practices, our defaults, our timeouts, our Citrix Enterprise browser configuration settings, so that if you fire up the browser, because we just published something there, it's got the settings we expect. So now things can ET phone home a lot smarter and keep that workspace experience congruent and working the way you want it to as an administrator. So it's really good stuff.
Yeah,
I like these use cases are good.
And I think Patrick, coming out of the IT audit space, I can't tell you the number of times that we ran into situations where we'd go in and do an audit, check VPN concentrators, and more importantly, VPN devices that were out in the field, and find out that they hadn't been updated in months, if not years, for a couple of reasons, right? Nobody wants to touch them and break something, because that's going to cause a lot of problems downstream. The other thing is that I think nowadays people's attitudes have changed towards this automated update capabilities. Thanks to our friends at Microsoft, I mean, we're used to turning our computer on or connecting to our computer on Wednesday morning and find out that, oh crap, it's been rebooted because Microsoft pushed out a lot of patches automatically. Or getting the notification that McAfee's already done some updates to the antivirus. And that happens beyond or without the user even knowing, right? But as an administrator, I want to make sure that I do have the auto updates turned on. It's just the way of the world right now.
Yeah, I think this is kind of like the consumerization of electronics, and especially mobile devices. Like we've had a couple phases in the IT world. So first, our PCs started getting faster than our work computers. Now, then our work endpoints have completely caught up, and it's almost parity, but they're just not as cool. And then we got mobile devices, and then we used to just have a little chunky bag phone as the corporate phone. And then eventually we got iPhones, and mobile device management, mobile application management came. And now, as part of going down that mobile road, just the mobile devices, it's bled over into I'd call it the PC, Mac, Linux space, is that it's expected to get lots of updates, at least monthly, right? And everyone is getting into, I guess, the circadian rhythm of doing updates on all your things all the time. And even being more conscious of it, like, oh yeah, that updated. Oh, my Ring doorbell updated, my this updated, my computer updated, my Elgato, blah, 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 my Stream Deck, my Switch, my Xbox, my PlayStation, like all these things are always updating. So it's just becoming natural. And then with just that consumerization, then that's when like FOMO kind of comes in there, is like, oh, there's a cool feature on that new thing. Well, yeah, I'm actually going to click it and go now, right? Like I'm ready to go. And so that's happened in the consumer side so much to people, but the business side, it's like, if you're not taking advantage of it as like the IT nerds running your ship, you're missing out. You need to be doing updates. You can't wait months anymore, right? You've got to get these things done. And people are a lot more understanding because it's the way of the world. We are in digital workspace for sure.
Hey, Bill, why do we need something like this? When I say need something like this, like an on-prem version of SPA, like at a high level. At a high level, I think it really is designed for those customers that aren't ready to go to the cloud or can't go to the cloud in particular. And they touched on it a little bit at the beginning of the article. Regulated industries, government agencies that can't enable access to the internet, at least not put a service in the cloud today. They've got to host it and manage it on premises. Maybe certain regulated industries like financial services or maybe even law in some cases. But I think those are the key drivers for this. If you go back up in the article towards the top, it talks a little bit about closed networks and highly regulated environments. So I think that's what's driving the desire for an on-prem solution.
Totally. And to pair with everything that Bill said too, is that there's still just a chunk of web applications that SPA and the Citrix Enterprise browser can get in the middle and secure further that are still in someone's data center, right? Yeah. Or in a closed network. So when it was cloud only, and when they first released this, it was what it was. It was like, okay, well, that's cool, because there's still a lot of people that are using Salesforce and company website A, B, C, D, E, F, G, right? But then there's still a whole bunch that are randomcompanywebsite.com, right? And like now you've bridged the gap. And then this is where that kind of ZTNA kind of thing really starts shining, because now I can provide that same security, access control, visibility, logging, the whole analytical security risk behavior stuff too for web applications in my data center and out of my data center, and in applications in my data center and applications out of my data center. We talk about the classic Windows kind of VDI kind of related thing. So it's really cool stuff.
Yeah, I had a few customers last year that were running on-prem CVAD.
Yeah.
That we gave a demo of SPA to, and they loved it. And then it became, well, how do we integrate this with what we got on-prem? I was like, well, it cannot be done without two different experiences, right? I can give you storefront on-prem, I give you gateway on-prem, but then you got to do this other thing if you want to hit workspace in the cloud or flip between two. And so that was a pain. So when I saw this, I go, there's going to be a lot of happy customers who've been looking at this for a long time.
Right. Yeah. And I think it's good that they did it too, because if we're all being honest too, like the Citrix Workspace app, once it's glued to a store, it likes to be glued to one store, one source of truth, one Oracle. And so if you said you were going to go see that on site, you're like, oh, go to this URL. And if you're going to Citrix Cloud, you go to this URL. And all the things aren't in both things. Only half the things are in the other place, right? And so when you finally had this, then it's like, go to one URL. You'll see all the things. There's a couple cloud sprinkles here, but everything else is the regular ice cream you've been eating every day, right?
Right, exactly. So in the blog, it talks a little bit about use cases. I want to touch on these just real quick. They identified 3 here that are on the screen. One is, we've talked around a lot of this, but one is for secure access for employees and contractors. The other is ZTNA, or zero trust enforcement for the last mile, and then M&A. Any comments? Let's talk about the first use case first. Secure access for employees and contractors from managed or unmanaged devices to internal web and SaaS apps. I think we've kind of touched on that. Anybody want to make any comments relative to that use case?
So I can talk to that, Bill. There's been a couple of changes that have occurred within this contractor and employee use case, right? Mm-hmm. Especially on the contractor side, a lot of organizations are starting to use some type of crowdsourcing or some type of gig based, almost like a TaskRabbit type of approach, right? I need something very specific done for a very short period of time. I need to grant you access, and I can't go through the month it's going to take to get someone up to speed, get them the system that they need to do. I just need them to hit a website, but I want to make sure I protect that website. We had a large opportunity a couple of years ago at a yearbook company, actually. They do most of the high school yearbooks for, students to get, and they have a lot of, the yearbook club at the school gets access to the design tools and things like that. But it's for a very short period of time, and they're uploading and downloading content. They're editing things. They're doing all kinds of different components on this. I don't want to have to build out a huge infrastructure for something that I'm going to tear down at the end of the school year. I need it to be very secure, be able to have the uploading and downloading, or specifically the uploading of photographs and content and things like that. But I want it to go away very quickly. That's become a very normal business practice, right? Granting someone very temporary access for a very specific task, and then when they're done with that task, take it away.
Right.
Without having to go and collect equipment, turn off access and things like that. I just want it to be seamless.
And here's a little subtle twist on least privilege access. So not quite in this bucket, but when you think about it, what did you used to have to do when you were publishing a web browser for a contractor? Well, you had to spin up a session on a XenApp server in the data center, right? And so you had to make sure that session was locked down. So even though I'm managing copy and paste and those sorts of things, within the session to out of the session, I've also have just, holy smokes, a lot of group policies turned on just to restrict access. I had to make sure that XenApp host was secure, the whole 9 yards. In this case, you're removing that piece of it, and you're relying simply on that SPA session. And there's very little that you're allowing through by default, except for just access to this one web app. So you've you've got an opportunity just to by default, provide a different level of security than just giving a contractor a XenApp session, which sounds a little weird because we always talk about XenApp sessions being pretty secure.
Yep.
Absolutely. So use case number 2 looks very similar when you look at the language, but it says provide comprehensive last mile zero trust enforcement. And then it goes through a lot of the same things. So what is last mile zero trust enforcement really referring to there? Patrick, can you take that one?
Yeah, well, I was sitting there as soon as you highlighted it. I was like, it should be changed from last mile to the last inch. Right. Sure. And why it should be changed to the last inch is because it's 1 inch away from clicking this browser versus the Citrix Enterprise browser, 1 inch away on your screen from clicking this thing versus that thing, working in a space that is secure and working in a space that is not secure. And so that's where I think it's there, because after a mile, the game's over, right? That last inch, that last click, where you put your mouse matters. And but yeah, being able to control that endpoint beyond just endpoint protection or content control, right? That's where this really shines. And that's where they're referring to that last mile, which should be changed to last inch.
Gotcha. And the last use case, accelerate merger and acquisitions. We run into this a lot with M&A, a lot with M&A and joint ventures and things along those lines. But it talks about leveraging multiple identity providers here. Anybody want to take this one real quick?
Yeah, actually, Geremy and I could probably both take this because we've been living this for the past several months.
Yeah, you probably have.
Right?
Yeah.
Getting access to companies' websites as a new employee or as a employee that's being merged in with another organization. Think about the complexity of having to open up firewalls and connecting networks and connecting data centers. That used to be a 6-month long process. I think Geremy and I lived through this in a, one day we're being told that tomorrow you're going to get an email with the following link and here's how you sign in. It's going to be a different set of credentials, but don't worry, your single sign-on is going to work. It's going to pass through. I mean, this is something that, once again, this is becoming part of the new normal when it comes to onboarding new employees or newly acquired employees.
Absolutely. All right. Let's see. That covers the entire article. This has been a great discussion. I guess we'll wrap it up now. I think, and Andy said this a couple of weeks ago. I forget what the subject was at that time, that Citrix clearly is putting their money where their mouth is, so to speak, in terms of doubling down and delivering on the concept of the hybrid cloud, and making sure that all of their solutions run not just in the cloud, but also on premises to address those customers. So kudos to Citrix for really doing this. This has been one that we've had customers ask about, can I do this on-prem? Can I do this on-prem? And here we've got the solution now that we might be able to leverage this for a lot of these customers that are looking for these solutions. So definitely a positive thing there. Any final words from you guys about this, or anything else related to the blog?
A couple of things. I'll highlight the deployment guide at the bottom there. So that is out of TechZone. So if you're not a TechZone fan, become one, because there's a lot of really good content out on TechZone. Yeah. And then the other two is really, I guess, kind of some Easter eggs here. So maybe this becomes a thing. We use the word dazzle in every podcast going forward. So you have to find a way.
It's still in the registry,
It's in the registry.
Oh yeah,
Dazzle lives on. Yeah,
it does for sure. I had a healthcare client many years ago, and that's what they labeled when we put it in. It was then called Dazzle, and I think even to this day, folks still call it Dazzle. We're going to the Dazzle website. I'm like, it's really not called that anymore, guys. But
just go for it. Remember when the Germans bombed Pearl Harbor? Yeah, just let him go with it. He's on a roll. Just let him go with it. Yep. and then secondly, Bill, did you say Financial Force earlier? Is that just another way to say? Okay, all right. I thought I caught that.
No, Financial Force is an ERP system that runs on the Salesforce platform. It's a different company. We're migrating to that for our internal PSA, our internal project management system, in the summer.
Okay, I didn't know that was a thing. I thought you were just finding a clever way to not say Salesforce, but there we go.
Well, it runs on the Salesforce, on the Force platform, which is Salesforce's kind of native language, I guess now. So
Oh, so many things are coming together. I didn't realize the Force was a platform, and I think we'll probably find out at some point that Salesforce was invented over beers after the first prequel came out.
that would be an interesting discussion for
yeah,
sure.
It's timely that you brought us down this rat hole, Geremy, because you know.
I mean, if we can end on Baby Yoda / Grogu, I mean, this is a good session.
There you go. That's how the
we are
dots
coming
get
up on May the
gang.
4th.
Yeah. May the
That's
4th
right,
next
for sure.
week. Yeah.
Yep.
This
May
week.
the 4th and then Cinco de Mayo.
Mm-hmm.
There you go.
All right, guys, we'll wrap it for today. Thanks a lot. Thanks for joining. Thanks for listening to our listeners, and have a great day.
Excellent. See you guys.
See ya.